Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. I am Nitin Gokhale, and with me in the studio there are two special guests, China specialists, China watchers. Call them whatever you want, but they are the people who have the real insights into the India-China relations and, of course, the boundary issue. First, Mr. Sujan Chinoy, who is the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defence Studies and Analyses, and Lieutenant General S Narasimhan, who is the member of the National Security Advisory Board and also DG of the China Center for Contemporary Studies, which is an MEA think tank. Welcome both of you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The last few hours we've seen several developments in the India-China standoff that are happening in Ladakh. It is away from the standoff scenario. One, of course, is Prime Minister Modi has spoken, has given a statement, very balanced but strong message to China that we don't normally, we are not aggressors, but if instigated, we will do whatever is necessary. That I'm sure our viewers who have joined us live here have already seen it on TV and social media platforms. The second is that India's External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has spoken to his counterpart Wang Yi in Beijing, and the first statement or first report that has come out from both sides is that both have decided that the boundary dispute or the standoff and the current dispute will be dealt with fairly. So there is from various statements that are available now, there is an indication that China has taken note of India's concerns and India's anguish, if I may say so. So let me start with Mr. Chinoy. What do you make of these two statements, these two developments that I spoke about just now?
Well, thank you, Nitin, for having me on your show. And let me say that we welcome the fact that the External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S Jaishankar, and his counterpart, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, have had a conversation, because we have always maintained on our part that it is through dialogue that we wish to address all bilateral issues with China and resolve the boundary question, as well as any differences that we might have with regard to the line of actual control. So we welcome this step, and we should see it in a broader context. The fact that the dialogue mechanisms, established dialogue mechanisms between the two countries have always been available, both through diplomatic channels and through military channels. And we have a slew of agreements that we have concluded between the two sides by dint of hard work. From 1993 onwards, 96, 2005, 2012, 2013. And it should be our endeavor to implement the key clauses there, which is that neither side will use force or aggression against the other, will not use the threat of use of force, that both sides will do their utmost to maintain peace and tranquility in the border areas, and that they will cooperate with a view to resolving outstanding issues. So I welcome this contact that has been established at very senior levels of the government of India.
Right. General Narasimhan, coming to the military situation or the situation on the border, there is a lot of concern amongst people who do not have an idea about how the border management happens or how the interaction between Indian and Chinese troops happen on the border. And you've, of course, commanded in Nathula, and you've also commanded 3 Corps, which looks after a large China frontier. Just give us an idea about why do you think this aggressive behavior that has been seen of late from the Chinese side is happening? Is there some kind of a arrogance that has creeped in? Is there some kind of overall change in policy? What do you think? I mean, nobody's been able to put a finger to it, really.
Thanks, Nitin, to get me over for this interaction. You see, the behavior of Chinese, the aggressive behavior of the Chinese has not been new. It has always been happening, in the sense that it's a part of an overall kind of a behavior that you need to look at. You look at their wolf warrior kind of diplomacy. You look at their South China Sea issues. You look at any of these issues. They have been pretty aggressive of late. That is number one. Number two is that such kind of aggressive behavior is not new again in the border on the line of actual control. You look at the push and pull that took place in Yangtze earlier. Yeah, I'm sure you're aware of it. And similarly, you looked at in Pangung So itself in 2000 in 2017 when Doklam was on. You find that there was another incident where even stone throwing was happening around that time. The issue is this aggressive behavior has been happening over a period of time. It is not something which is new that we are seeing on the LAC. That is one. The difference this time around is in the aggression that has gone even beyond what was being visible earlier.
Exactly.
And that is one. The second thing that we get to see is for the first time in 45 years, both the sides have suffered casualties. So this is the second difference than the previous aggressive behavior that we get to see. The third one that we get to see is the kind of implements that are being used to do this. Earlier, it was only the stone part of it. This time around, we are hearing that even some kind of chains, etc., nails, etc., were put on something, and then this shows that one thing that the Chinese side was prepared for this kind of a face-off. Second thing that comes up is that there seems to be some kind of a determination to change the status quo ante that it was existing earlier. So this is something that we need to take it with care, look at it, and then do the needful that it is required. How do we resolve these issues on the border? There are mechanisms already existing. As we know, you have the flag meetings that take place. You have the border personnel meetings that take place. In addition to both, we also have smaller at the lower level. You have meetings taking place on the places where the face-off is taking place. Even in these incidents, other than the first day, you find that the ground level talks have been going on a daily basis. Even then, on 15th, the incident happened in Galwan. Actually happened the way PLA was trying to change the status quo that was existing even on that day, has actually resulted in this kind of a behavior. So there are uncertainties in this behavior. There are certain specific patterns in this behavior. We need to analyze both and come to a conclusion as to how to deal with this.
Right. Mr. Chinoy, you've spoken about the slew of agreements that we have, but there is a view, and maybe a minority view, but there is a view that these agreements are not working anymore. I mean, the kind of behavior that we've seen, the kind of violence that has happened first time in 45 years, there is a push to try and get control of territory, actual ground control position, rather than just talk about LAC perception. What do you attribute this behavior by the Chinese, and do you think the agreements need to be revisited?
Well, I entirely agree with you that the agreements need to be revisited. Besides that, they need to be implemented in their fullest form with great sincerity. And by sincerity, I mean on the part of the Chinese side, because India has been scrupulous in terms of its observance of these agreements and the standard operating procedures and the confidence building measures that we have actually elaborated in these agreements. So the key point here is that India was a latecomer to the concept of the line of actual control. For us, the boundary with China was our traditional historical boundary. It was a traditional frontier. And in many places, it was also delineated and agreed to as a result of conventions. It was the Chinese viewpoint that in the eastern sector, there is no real line there, and that the McMahon line was an illegal line. But for the purpose of a working boundary, the Chinese would accept it as a line of actual control. But the fly in the ointment was in the eastern sector, which is also important. And we may end up having to deal with management of that border also. The point is that they wanted the line as literally transposed on the ground. And we followed the watershed principle. Elsewhere also, we had this problem in terms of what the Chinese called their line of actual control. In the Western sector where it matters, we must all remember that the concept of the line of actual control came into being only because of Chinese aggression. First, the nibbling through the 1950s, then the elaboration of a somewhat speculative and fictitious, self-serving and expedient line of actual control of 7 November 1959, and thereafter a further description and elaboration in 1960. The fact of the matter is that the Chinese were nowhere near that so-called line until they began to nibble away salami slice territory. So the core issue here is that the Chinese have always used the concept of the LAC to push eastwards in the Western sector up to a so-called conceptual line that they have in mind. And they've never agreed to exchange maps, despite there being an agreement to that effect. Large-scale maps have to be exchanged. Both sides must know where the LAC lies in the perception of the other. Then there are joint surveys, and then you also talk about delineation of a common line on the ground, etc. So I feel that in the past, many of our protocols did work. In fact, we, as General Narasimhan rightly said, we have border personnel meetings, regular, irregular ones. We have flag meetings. We have ad hoc meetings. We have hotlines. We have also agreed in the Border Defense Cooperation Agreement of 2013 that we will have the top brass in the MOD and the armies also talk to each other and engage in exchanges. That is to say, off the border CBMs also. But off late, let me conclude by saying on this point that off late, I have observed that the Chinese have not been observing the protocols and the SOPs and the CBMs in place. Now, it's a fact that many of them are not working. Therefore, it suggests to me, logically, that the two sides have to sit down and improve upon the drills and the SOPs in place so that such incidents are never repeated.
Yes. So, General Narasimhan, maybe you're able to read on the screen the question from somebody called Motley Fool. But that's a question that many people have in their mind after the Army's press release last night of accepting or declaring that 20 soldiers have got killed in action. So people want to know, is there a way to retaliate against the Chinese? Is there a need to retaliate against the Chinese like we do with the Pakistanis? I mean, something that is very hard to answer, I know, but I think you will be able to take on this question.
I understand the feeling because this is basically an emotive kind of an issue, and so obviously these kind of feelings are coming out. But let me tell you that we should not jump the gun. Let us look at the options available. Maybe at this moment, what is happening is, as you mentioned in the opening remarks, the foreign ministers are speaking. At the ground level, the commanders have been speaking. The question will always come back to say that, look, they didn't behave on 15th. Why will they behave in future? But that doesn't mean that we don't try all these measures before we go into something more lethal, more kinetic. So this is something that it's a step-by-step kind of a process. We hope that initial process itself will lead way to the disengagement process that was agreed on the 6th of June. If it is not there, I'm sure there will be other options that will be on the cards, which I can't probably discuss in the open here. There will be other things that will be worked out in a way that we apply some pressure to get what we want.
Right. Mr. Chinoy, taking off from there, a lot of people have another view about this, that for the first time after 1962, and correct me if I am wrong, that the Chinese have actually come to the Galwan area, to the Galwan Valley, or tried to show some force there. Why is Galwan so important? And since you have studied the boundary, if you can throw some light on that, and then I'll come back to General Narasimhan about the other points.
Look, the fact of the matter is that whenever the Indian side or anyone like you or me claims that we know where the Chinese LAC is, we are speculating.
Yeah.
Let us keep in mind that the knowledge that is available in India about the so-called line of actual control that the Chinese speak of is through three sources. One is as a result of what they have claimed in descriptions. The second point is that they have also establish certain presence, forward postures and positioning, etc. And the third thing is that when they patrol, we can actually plot the patrolling points and speculate about where their line of actual control is. Originally, we had only a small scale map to go by, which had appeared in the Peking Review of 1960. On a large scale map, they have been very reluctant and loath to provide any details. The only sector in which we managed to exchange large scale maps was the middle sector. And that was a long time ago, 18 years ago, that we exchanged maps. But we did not thereafter together sit down and delineate on a single map the two lines because of Chinese reluctance to proceed down that line. Now, why do they come to areas in the western sector, whether Pangong Tso, Galwan, whether it's the Chipchap, whether it is, the hot springs area, or further south to, Spangur, Chushul, Demchok, etc. The reason is that they have in their mind and on their maps a certain calculated line of actual control. Now, they are not necessarily there in every place, nor is it a fact that they have been coming there regularly. With better improved infrastructure on their side, they've been able to patrol their forward areas more easily. And in contrast to the past, they are also setting up forward presence, unlike the past. That brings them closer and temptingly closer to their so-called LAC. Remember also that it is army commanders finally on the ground who will decide the last mile definition of any LAC. Because it's the commander on the spot who will say that I want to be on this spur or I want to be on that height in order to be able to better protect my area. So there is this last mile interpretation also, which I guess is an affliction on their part, depending on who is in charge. And there is a certain context today with China under a scanner. I think China is also trying to project an image of combat readiness, notwithstanding the coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic. They're under pressure and they're trying to display this kind of, signaling, give this kind of a signaling about battle readiness and combat readiness to a domestic audience as well as to a broader international audience. Galwan per se is not something which I credit with the importance of overlooking the, Darbuk, Shayok, DBO highway. Let's face it, that track existed in the old days also. It was converted into a better road more recently. And to be frank, with standoff weapons today, if somebody really wants to threaten a highway or a bridge on a certain river, it does not matter whether it is 5 kilometers away or 10 kilometers away. You have today the means to specifically target any kind of position. So I would say, I would attribute it to general combativeness, general sense of invincibility, a desire to convey to the rest of the world that we are combat ready. It's a lot of signaling under pressure. And India, of course, cannot take this lightly. And India is not a country that is going to readily accept some kind of speculative, irredentist LAC claim that the Chinese have. We will definitely reject that. But the way forward is also not to wage war. Obviously, if aggressed upon, India would always give a befitting reply. There is no doubt in my mind that India would give a very befitting reply, as we have done to our adversaries in the past. There are many occasions that, Nitin, you are more familiar with. But that is never the answer to any kind of long-term problem. Dialogue is the way forward. We must seize upon this opportunity to continue to talk to one another at every level and ensure that we maintain our interests and seek a fair and reasonable, some kind of mutually acceptable solution. That's the way forward.
That's the way forward, certainly. General Narasimhan, on the ground, the troops, of course, have very strict instructions, standard protocols, all that follows. But in some of these remote areas along the frontier, the Himalayan frontier, the China frontier, whatever we may want to call it, is it because of our improved infrastructure over the past decade or so that there are more standoffs, more face-offs happening because of our ability to go much nearer to the perceived line of actual control, and the Chinese therefore are also finding it tough to keep it hidden, their intentions on pushing the boundary westward in Aksai Chin especially, if not in Arunachal Pradesh. What's your sense?
It is a combination of things that is actually working on this. First one is what you said is right. The infrastructure has been catching up. We are actually taking the roads, etc., forward right up to the LAC. So this is one way that the patrolling has improved. Our reach to go to those areas has improved. The more you do this, obviously more contact you will establish with any Chinese patrol that are coming in, and that is one of the reasons why this has happened. That is one. Second thing is China came first to the infrastructure building concept in those areas. So they had the first mover advantage. They had done whatever they need to do on the infrastructure part. And now, when we do this infrastructure and it is somewhere going towards the LAC, they seem to be objecting to it. So this is something that we have maintained, that we reserve the right to construct the infrastructure in our territory, and will continue to do so because it is within our territory. So this is something that is to be borne in mind. The second aspect is also on the patrolling. The patrolling, the earlier also you would have heard, even in this incident, patrolling point 14, 15, 17, and things like that. Basically, these patrolling points have been in existence for a long time now, and we have been going to those patrolling points. The more you go towards those patrolling points is the place where actually Chinese also come to those areas. And so you get into a face-off into these particular areas also. So all these things are a factor that has increased the face-off that are happening. And you would have noticed these things have started increasingly coming into limelight from 2013 onwards, when the Desang Bal incident took place. Before that, other than say 86, Sundrungchu, you hardly heard. You heard intrusions, you heard in transgressions, etc., etc., but it didn't come to these levels. And these levels have started reaching only from 2013 onwards, 2013, 14, 17, and now 20. So this
That's
is
right.
something which is a recent phenomena. You can attribute it to both the patrolling patterns plus also the infrastructure construction that has taken place in those areas.
Right. But one more question to you, General Narasimhan, before I go to Mr. Chinoy. The pattern of patrolling, as we all know, because of improvement on our side, there's more kind of an encounter and all that is happening. But as far as the Chinese are concerned, do you think they have a larger message to give to the other neighbors in Southeast Asia and South Asia, and try and humiliate India in a way that they're trying to do, so that they have a free run in the neighborhood? Is that something that India should be concerned about?
You see, this question is also related to the larger question of what is the motive behind what is happening at this point in time.
Right.
I do understand where you come from. That's why I thought I'll cover that also in a short while. So the
Yeah.
issue that comes up is, a lot of people have spoken about, since we are going nearer to US, we are, South China's issues are coming up. A whole lot of things are being linked to the FDI restrictions that we imposed. Whole lot of and internal issues are becoming difficult for the Chinese government, and so they want to do a diversion. All these can be countered one by one if it is required. I'm not going to go into the details because time is
Sure.
short. What I
Yeah.
am trying to say is this should be, and if they have to send a lesson, please understand it is not only the Indian army that suffered casualties on 15th. I am sure equally or more casualties were suffered by the Chinese also. So what kind of message will that go in case it has to be what you are saying? So what I am
Right.
trying to say is, I think what is happening now, right from the first week of May, we should see it as a bilateral territorial issue, which will be a better way of looking at it things, and it will also help you in dealing with it in that particular manner.
Right. Mr. Chinoy, taking off from that point, in the neighborhood, of course, there is another view that is going around, that in the world, across the world, there are no backyards, no influence anymore of the big countries. Like Australia is now struggling to sort of contest Chinese influence in the Pacific island nations. India is contesting with China in South Asia. Others in Southeast Asia. I mean, Americans are sort of feeling left out in Southeast Asia. So in that sense, this is a new reality of today's international relations. So why should India worry so much about Chinese inroads into our own neighborhood or our extended neighborhood? What's your sense on that?
Look, I agree with you. Firstly, that global power is today fractured. And there's no single country that can call all the shots on all the issues at all times. We've entered that stage already where there are state and non-state actors who are able to use asymmetrical means to equalize and bridge any gaps that might exist in absolute power. So in such a scenario, let's say that it's become more of a level playing field for everyone. And it is true that the Chinese have been growing over the last 3.5 decades. And it is also true that there has been accretion in their economic and military power. But in keeping with that growth, they have also been spilling over into the neighborhood. I think in the Far East, one of the primary focuses of China's foreign policy objectives is to limit the extent of US power, and especially so on issues that concern its sovereignty and territorial integrity as they view it. When it comes to South Asia, for me, the Chinese spillover today, more particularly in the manner in which it has taken place, is a new phenomenon. And if I were to look at the Indian Ocean, I would say the Chinese are coming in for the first time after 600 years. When we had altercations in 1962, of course, air power was not used as a particular political decision. But remember that there were no face-offs in the maritime space at all. I won't be too sure today because of the fact that at any given point of time, there are a few Chinese vessels in the Indian Ocean. But that only buttresses my point that the Chinese presence in South Asia is of a relatively new order when it comes to the maritime space and of a completely different character when it comes to India's neighborhood. Now, we are all aware of China's capabilities, but we are not very clear about their intentions. And it is very important for a rising power to first understand the nature of power, the extent of power, the manner in which power can be used without inviting pushbacks. And that is where China has failed to reassure its neighbors. It has failed to reassure a country like India in South Asia as to what its intentions are when it comes into Nepal or Bangladesh or any other country in a certain manner, which is different from the past. So I would say that China has a lot of homework to do. The generation that is at the helm of affairs today has witnessed the complete transformation of a China whose GDP in 1980 per capita was the same as India's, today to a GDP that is much bigger. And it is a process that they've not been able to fully digest or appreciate as a rising power. There are lessons there for the Chinese as well.
That's true. So there is this question, Narasimhan, India should oppose China in all world forums. Ram Badran Babu is asking and saying recognize Taiwan, the revoke one China policy. Of course, that is one. But before you answer this question, I have one more question to both of you, which you can answer one by one. And it is this. This is a common refrain that I've been hearing for the past almost 10 days, and more particularly since last night, is that are we sort of in a scene or in a spot which is a repeat of pre-1962? So I want you to answer both these questions, Narasimhan, and then I'll come to Mr. Chinoy on the final word from him.
Okay. Firstly, on this pre-1962 question, I'm sure even in Dolam and everywhere beyond, whenever some issues happen, the army hierarchy and everybody else has made that there will be no repeat of 1962. So that is something that we should be clear about. We have come a long way from what happened in 1962. The structures are in place. In 1962, the structures were broken at that point in time. It was difficult to, and the infrastructure and other issues were there. All those things have been taken care of over a period of time. Indian Army is a professional army, which has, after 62, it has fought 65, 71, 99. So professional experience also has...
Not to forget 67.
Not to forget 67, of course. How can I forget? I commanded the brigade.
Exactly.
67 and 71 and 99. So Indian Army is a professional, experienced army. So nobody can just treat it as a pushover. It will not happen. So that particular point, let me put it to rest to people. That was, I'm saying that It is, we are not hoping to escalate in any manner. I'm sure we'll find ways and means of resolving it. But push comes to shove, Indian Army can hold on its own. I mean, there is no two ways about it. That is the message I want to send it to all the viewers of this program. And the second
Right.
thing is about, what to do with Taiwan, what to do with Hong Kong, what to do with Xinjiang, what to do with Tibet, one China policy. A whole lot of issues are, we should not talk about them so glibly. It is not so simple to discuss these things in a forum like this. There are detailed analysis that are available on how to deal with each one of them. So I think we should leave it to the government and the MEA and others to deal with these issues, than to talk loosely on forums without understanding what are the implications of these. So this is something that it comes to our mind definitely when such events take place. These are reactions and retaliation that come to our mind all the time. But these are emotional issues because of which these recommendations are coming. These are to be given a deep thought. The end state has to be visualized correctly before we take any of these issues.
Right. Mr. Chinoy, both the questions, your thoughts on that. Taiwan,
Well,
I mean, one China policy, and of course, are we in a repeat of 1962 or pre 1962?
well, firstly, let me say that I agree with General Narasimhan, my friend, and also want to reiterate the fact that there is no question of humiliating India. Those days are over. The India of today is not the India of 1962, as was brought out quite clearly by General Narasimhan. So it's a fact that we have to keep in mind ourselves. And while doing so, we have to salute our armed forces for their robust readiness and preparedness at all times to give a befitting reply to any aggression that is committed on India. India is a peace-loving country that has given to the world the values of peace, truth, non-violence, all the way from Gautam Buddha to Mahatma Gandhi. But that does not mean that we would passively accept any kind of aggression on us. Having said that, let me say that the way forward has to be one of dialogue, of a peaceful resolution of all disputes, because there is much global uncertainty all around today. The world is grappling with a pandemic. It's in the throes of an economic contraction, and some might say a recession that will take years to come out from. It is going to leave no country unscathed, and that includes China, it includes India. So we have to keep in mind the strategic guidance that Prime Minister Modi has given to us on our side, and we assume that China is also abiding by the agreements reached in Wuhan and Mamallapuram to give strategic guidance to their side as well, to ensure that lower formations, whether they are in the military or whether they are in the bureaucracy, in the diplomacy, also fully appreciate this. Having said that, Nitin, let me also quickly add that we must rein in the media's proclivity to prejudge and to put the cart before the horse. And we really cannot run military affairs or diplomacy out of media chat rooms, whether the print media or the electronic media. So kindly leave that to the professionals. We should have great faith in our political leadership for showing us the way ahead. Wisdom will prevail. We have very wise leaders at the level of the Prime Minister and the External Affairs Minister of India. And I'm sure the Chinese will realize the benefits of living in peace with India, as we have done over the centuries. Because mind you, we cannot wish each other away. We have been together cheek by jowl across the Himalayas for thousands of years, and we are going to remain so for thousands of years. So we have to look for a modus vivendi that is feasible, that is sustainable in the long run. And I'm sure you would not be suggesting that going to war is a feasible option. It would obviously set back both countries considerably. It's not as if there would be retardation on one side. There would be a problem on both sides. And I don't think the Chinese would also be looking to expand that theater of conflict and to also risk the fact that this is a new India, an India that China needs to get used to. As the world is expected by China to get used to its rise, China must also adjust itself to the relative rise of others.
Right.
For while China has been growing, the rest of the world, and particularly India, has not been marking time. We have also come a long way. And so that is the kind of mutual respect that has to be given and earned. And if we, subscribe to the theory of a one China policy, equally we expect reciprocity, and China must be extremely mindful and sensitive to India's concerns about India's sovereignty and territorial integrity. There will have to be some kind of reciprocity on such key critical issues. It's not going to be one-way traffic on that. So generally speaking, I think the Chinese are also increasingly aware of the fact that this is an India that has also risen, and there is space in Asia for all of us. We have to convince the Chinese of that too. If they are apprehensive on the border about the fact that they had a first movers advantage and now India is closing the gap, and that disequilibrium by them is considered as unacceptable, then that's really unfair, isn't it? Because they had a right to build infrastructure, so do we. And so these are things that we have to tell them across a table, across a military table as required in border personnel meetings and at meetings held between senior officers. But we have to push forward on engagement and dialogue, rework the protocols that are not working, engage at the highest political level, also have a all of nation approach. This is something that I would suggest. And you play an extremely important role there. You're an extremely well-informed person, an expert on strategic and military affairs, and people like you can contribute immensely to educating our side and also conveying correct information to the other side as well through your channels and portals.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chinoy, for those words. And General Narasimhan, thank you for joining. Clearly, after the bloodshed on the LAC, the way forward, of course, lies through negotiations, talks, cool heads to prevail. Ultimately, I think both nations, as both of you have said, have to coexist. And
Seems like we lost
him.
Nitin, we lost Nitin for a moment. I'm sure he'll burst onto the scene again.
I think we can wind up, sir. I'm sure he'll be he'll be able to manage that.
All right. So should we
see you in the evening, sir, again?
Thank you. See you later this evening. I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much. And we thank Nitin in absentia for having actually conducted what I thought was a remarkable show. And he comes in with such perceptive questions and remarks and observations of his own as well. So thank you. Let's thank each other and goodbye. See you later.
Thanks. Bye.